So
Well,
thank you for joining us. Yeah, let me introduce Amber. Go ahead.
thank you guys for all being here. I apologize that we're running a little behind. Zoom decided it was going to Zoom for us today. So you are hopefully here to just spend a little time with us this afternoon, looking at what are some of our ACES skills that we're using to support our mathematicians. So what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to take a few minutes here right at the beginning of the of our time together and take a second and think about, you don't have to put anything in chat. I just want you to think to yourself, would you rather? So you have two options on the screen, and I want you to think about which option you would select. So I'm going to be quiet for a minute so you can read and think. So I haven't given you a ton of time, but I hopefully gave you a little time. Our two prompts are, would you rather read 12 pages every night in a chapter book that has 144 pages? Or would you rather read 50 pages 3 times a week in a chapter book with 132 pages? I'd like for you to take a second right now and find your chat, open it up, and I would like for you to let us know, which would you rather? Would you rather read 12 pages or 50 pages? Go ahead and put that in the chat.
Oh, it looks like 50 is quite popular.
I also appreciate the mom of young children being happy if she could read 12, if she had the time to read 12 pages in one sitting. Can somebody, so I do see a lot of people who pick 50. Can somebody in the chat tell me, why would you pick 50? Or for my friends, I had a couple of friends that picked 12. Why would you pick 12? So can you put in the chat briefly why you would pick what you did? Oh, I see some wonderful stuff happening in chat. So, Ellen, I am seeing I can get it done in 3 days. What I find really curious is that I never saw the number 3. Oh, I did. It was in a word form.
It's in there.
Interesting. So I had to look at, okay, so I would be done in 3 days, but I had to notice that. I like the people who are like, I can't sit still for 50 pages. I feel like that is a vibe for me. There's a lot of people who are thinking about like how they're coming to the reading, and that is really important. Now, if you were in a math class and you were in my math class, which is currently happening, you might think that there must be a mathy answer to this. If you were to try to think about, so we all came to this with different experiences and different reasonings on why, but nobody said, well, if I calculated the time per page, right? But those are questions we could bring in. This whole webinar we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we can bring in some of those things where you're having your gut reaction or your gut feeling or your real life experience, and how we're going to leverage that in the math classroom. So keep that chat box up and ready and nearby for the next hour and a half. We're going to be in and out of chat. We're going to be talking. We're going to be engaging. And hopefully you are going to be able to learn some interesting things. So we're just going to introduce ourselves real quick in case you don't know who we are. My name is Amber Delliger, and Ellen, do you want to introduce yourself?
I am Ellen Skogen.
We work together at Anoka Ramsey Community College as a part of the partnership with Metro North Adult Basic Education. So we are working side by side and in ABE specific classrooms, supporting learners as they're transitioning to be hopefully independent college ready students. Now we're going to use a lot of examples from our site, and our site obviously is co-located on a college campus, but nothing that we're saying today is specific to a college campus. So there are things that at any location, in any kind of setting, you should be able to adapt for what your site needs, but also getting your students ready as they transition into whether it is additional training or college or some kind of career. All of the skills we're talking about today are really required for our mathematicians to be successful and independent in their next steps.
And very adaptable to levels. So I have the lowest level of math students at the college, the ABE level, and then Amber helps a little higher up. So we can adapt.
Hopefully, and I'm hopefully during all this time together, you'll be able to share some ideas that you have on how you can adapt these as well. So I just want to set the stage for what we're thinking and where our goal is to go today. So we're going to start out with a little bit of an introduction or a refresher of what ACES are. You might have seen that, and maybe that was a reason you chose to come to our session today. But in case you're not familiar with it, then we're going to focus on setting the stage for learning with our learning environments. And learning environments really kind of go over many parts of ACES, but we're going to kind of just briefly touch on that at the beginning. Then we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into 3 areas of ACES: navigating systems, self-management, and learning strategies. So these are our goals for today. So hopefully that's what you want to learn about. And if not, hopefully you learned something exciting. So for our friends that maybe aren't familiar, or maybe it's like you're like me and it's been a long time since you've gone through your ACES foundation, over on this page you can see here that ACES stands for the Academic, Career, and Employability Skills. ACES is one of the 3 major frameworks that we use here in Minnesota ABE to set the stage for what we want our students to be learning, thinking, and doing in their time with us to set them up for success once they are outside of our walls. You're going to notice that we have these skills here. These partner really well with our CCRS, our content standards. Also, a number of the things we're going to talk about today also really pair well with our North Star digital literacy standards. They go really well together, and it's actually at some points hard to divorce them from each other, which is what Ellen and I have been learning on this college embedded adventure. We have all of these different areas. We're not going to focus on all of them today, but if you want a refresher or you want to learn more, or if something we say piques your interest and you want to dig in even further, the Atlas Resource Library has tons of beautiful, wonderful things, including standards, the look-fors. There's more webinars you can go to and watch the recordings of. There's lesson plans, there's guides, there's tools. There is a ton of really great vetted materials on the Atlas Resource Library. There's also the ACES Foundations training if you feel like maybe you're not familiar with what ACES are and you want a really targeted deep dive. So these are going to be those skills that we need to be successful not only in term but beyond. And so when I looked at finding an activity today, our Would You Rather is an activity. Obviously, it's a math activity. We talk about a math practice because this is a beautiful activity to practice constructing a viable argument, critiquing the reasoning of others. It is very great at talking about a couple of those CCRS standards. But this also ties in well with the critical thinking skills. So throughout our presentation, you're going to notice that we're going to use a little icon that talks about which portion of ACES it goes with, and then one of the skills that it would fit under. Obviously, these skills are really broad, and I want to make sure it doesn't sound like you can shoehorn every activity you do into an ACES skill, but it's really hard for us to find places that we're not actually really reinforcing these ACES skills. So this critical thinking is really important because we're using information to draw conclusions and make decisions. Now, in our math classroom, we do that really a lot when we're working with our mathematical practices, but we also want to make these connections really clear in other areas of the classroom. And I find that students do great when they can see that it's not just in one isolated area, that we are bringing them through to a lot of our different instruction.
So we're going to start talking just a little bit on learning environment. It can play a really big part of if a student is more comfortable in the classroom, how they're going to do. And everybody does this, but it's easy to forget, especially this time of the year. Some of you have, testing that you're trying to get done. You're trying to get all of this information done by the end of this year, semester, whatever time frame you're at. And we just want to remind everybody that math is not just math. English is not just English. And there's just little things we can do to help the students. So we looked at routines and, okay, I lost my stuff. Here we go. How do you start the class? Do you just jump in, start throwing things at them? Do you do warm-ups, board work, set procedures? Is it written so they know what to expect? The physical space, we try and do some lighting, posters. Amber usually has plants in our classroom. How are we grouping the students? How are they sitting? How can we support them outside of the class? We try and use the same classroom space so it's something they're comfortable with. Individual meetings, do you do Google check-ins? We're emailing support systems, emailing students. How are we setting the stage for learning? So navigating systems is the first place we're going to start. Let's play a little game. Here's a board game. There's the bowl. There's the pieces, the board. Let's play. So in the chat, what questions might you have before we even get started with this game? You came walking in. I put it in front of you. What do you want to know? What is the objective? How do you win? Nice, Carly. Is it a two-person game? What are the rules? How many pieces do we begin with? All very good questions. So each game, what is the prize? Nice, Betsy. I bet you've all learned, well, if you've ever played with small children and they make up their own game, you never are going to win. But there's also people you probably have learned a game from. Oh, I'll teach you. And then halfway through, they throw in a rule you never knew existed and don't know if you trust them. There's lots of rules in games. There's lots of strategy. There's lots of procedures. We don't just know. But yet when we have students come into our processes, into our placements, into our classrooms, we expect them to know everything. We expect them to know where to go, how to act, how to talk. These are navigating systems. Walking into a scary place the first time, if there's lots of people, they all seem to know what they're doing. It's not always easy. So navigating systems refers to the steps and strategies and skills that students can use towards achieving goals. So it might be organizing, setting goals, monitoring progress, things that help them adapt to their environment, problem solve wherever it comes up, and then become their own best advocate. How do they speak up for themselves? Where do they go? Who do they talk to? These are very big in most structures. So it's something we need to help push and teach. So I tried putting at least the start of a bunch, we all know there's more in each of our classrooms, but what do they need to know? What do our students need to know to be successful? Where do they start? So at the college level, we have walkthrough systems. We're walking through, where's your syllabus? Do you have to go to class? Do you have to do homework? How is scores put together? Where do you get your information if the class is canceled, or what do you need to know? Who do you contact? Campus resources. We have multiple soft skills things set up in my classroom. They're built into, a lot of the soft skills are built into the class, into the homework. Specifically, go look, find this, learn about what's offered where. Special use rooms, going through the syllabus and that kind of stuff, word problems, those are very specific things. Other things we kind of do as we go. Math is a very definite own language, vocabulary, skill set, and structure. I always tell my students, if you're a history teacher, I apologize, but if you run into a problem with a section in history or some of your other classes, you're going to move away from that soon. So, it's not that as big of a deal. In math, you never get away from it. If we don't understand it now, it's going to keep coming back to haunt you. So we need to tackle it. And like I said, word problems are huge. Can you even understand what it's asking you? How do we figure this out? We have a couple different sources that we have used, but also I try and pull in skills from the real world. Your job you're going to go into. What are you going to need to know? How are you going to feed your family? These are real things in math and life that students need to go. And then the self-advocacy. If I have problems, where do I go? What are my rights? What am I expected to do, but what also can I expect others to do? And if I don't feel they're doing or I'm not getting what I need, where can I go to get that support? Anything you want to add on that, Amber?
I think that while these aren't special in mathematics, I think there are additional systems that we're trying to navigate in the math classroom. Under the responses that was given about when we said, look at this game, we saw that people wanted to know, how do I win? What's the prize? What is the objective? And I think a lot of times that isn't clear for a lot of our students. And then what do I do if I don't know? How do I get help? What does success look like for me is often missing for many of our students, especially our students who are coming from other systems or other countries where success in a math classroom looks incredibly different than a success in a Western, especially a current Western classroom that focuses on in talking and being at the board and making mistakes and being messy rather than hyper focusing on things like the right answer. And so I think we need to be really explicit with our students about these systems and help them understand that they are not helpless in these systems, but they also have a lot of responsibility in these systems to know what the resources are and then how to take advantage of them.
Because they're adults and people expect them to know. And so we didn't even touch much on the real world applications outside of the college. So in the chat, could you put, what are some of the systems that your students face at school, work, outside in the real world? Where do yours need to have support to figure out?
Google Classroom, those online are huge systems to figure out. The healthcare system. We just found out our insurance premiums are going up 25%, figuring out what that means. The justice system, the financial aid system. In a traditional ABE classroom, you might have the people who work at the front desk who give you information. How do you get your testing done? How do you figure out what your schedule is? How are you managing childcare and work? I see that coming up in the chat. Housing, how do I know where to
Yep.
live? Do I have a safe place? And if I don't have a safe place to live, what do I do? Do I have food? Those are all systems that our students are navigating all the time.
Fabulous, thank you. And then to finish up, I just wanted to show up 3 of the systems I kind of help support. In the classroom daily, what are we going to be doing? What can they expect during the class? Weekly programs, connecting them to the college, what's available? Where can they go and make friends? Where can they do other fun things? And then online weekly announcements. Every semester, I start out a little more in depth, showing them this is where you go to find your homework. This is where you go to find this. And then by the end of the semester, like we're at now, they're hopefully have learned enough that they can do more on their own. And I've backed off quite a lot. So that's what I had. That was navigating systems. Next, Amber's going to go through self-management.
Yes, and navigating systems, I think, is the hardest one for our students. If they can't figure out how to show up and navigate that system, a lot of the other stuff that we're trying to do, they just don't have access to. So one of the things that I just want to highlight in Ellen's pictures here is nothing is a surprise. There are multiple ways that you can get the information, and maybe it's about things that are happening in your program. Maybe it's things that are happening in your community. Maybe it's conversation circles, but it's this way of understanding that they are part of something bigger, but then there's also the idea of understanding and looking ahead and really taking the time. If your students are working in Google Classroom, you're setting them up for success when they go to college and they have to be able to navigate those online classrooms. Most of the teachers I work with will post something online and not ever mention it in class, and it's the expectation of this that on the student that they are going to have to go there to access it. Or if they want to schedule a tutoring appointment, they're going to have to know that they can go in there and use it. So when we're modeling these, obviously our campus has robust activities and resources and things for students, but your programs offer a lot for your learners in lots of different ways. So how are you communicating those with your students, and how are you communicating those with each other? We find that modeling it not only for the students, but in between each other, and having these things clearly posted in multiple places, and then modeling how we read it, modeling how we navigate it, and then constantly going back and referring to it is the only way that our students are managing these systems effectively. And it should become part of that routine and that classroom learning environment that you're in. So students should not rely on you to navigate the system for them. They should have that agency to do that on their own.
But since I at the start of the math and the start of their college experience, a lot of times I want to do everything possible to set them up to be able to make it through Amber's class. So set them up for success.
We don't want there to be prizes. Success should be easily understood what success looks like. So as we're talking about navigating systems and having agency to have access to your own learning, one of the things that we're really struggling with in our classes right now is self-management. I think one of the things that has been an unfortunate byproduct of the pandemic is that students are really struggling to manage all of the demands that they have on their time, and being able to track and monitor and adjust what they're doing with their lives to help meet their goals. I think I'm seeing this more now than I've ever seen. So when we talk about self-management in terms of the ACES house, these are the steps, strategies, and skills our students need to achieve their goals. This might include things like organizing their study materials, setting a goal, and monitoring their progress. And I like to think about self-management is, what do we do when nobody's watching? What happens when we have little guidance, little structure, and little monitoring? Are we still doing the things that we need to do to help us our goals? And one of the things I want to really mention about this is that I think in ABE programs, we can do a lot better at developing these skills in our students, especially for those that are looking to transition
Sorry,
into
Amber,
career and looking to transition into
Yes.
Amber, you're cutting out just a little. Can you go back like 30 seconds and say that again? I wonder if it's a connectivity thing.
Okay. So moving on. I suppose we can't get to the next slide.
Let's
Okay,
see. Amber, can you hear us?
there she
There she
is.
is.
I can hear you.
Okay,
We lost
you
you.
froze for a
I
second and your audio's a little in and out. Just a heads up. Hang with us, everybody. We'll get there.
I
There we
am
go.
so
Go ahead,
sorry.
Ellen.
I'm having problems here.
No worries. We're looking at the notebook check slide. Ellen, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. So this is a little material station that we set up in all the classrooms. Any supplies that they need. There's always 3-ring binders, the paper, pencils, little wipes to clean off their desk. They can do the homework notes there, return assignments, any of that, just little extra stuff that they might need in the classroom to help them be successful. So there's one of Amber's examples. And there again, it's managing the information and the materials for this. Most students have no idea how to study and get ready for it. So it's really hard. It's really weird for me to have
So
students not be prepared for class. Are you back, Amber?
All right, Amber, you're frozen again. Oh,
yeah.
now you're back. Let's try it. Go
Okay,
ahead.
no.
I kind of went
I'm
through
so
this
sorry. I
slide.
don't understand what's happening.
That's okay.
If you want to go to the
Yeah.
next slide.
To make sure that
Okay. Well, this is interesting.
Would it be helpful if I shared slides?
Oh, there's the next slide. Yay. Well, else she can give us the slides. So we explicitly teach ways to study to the students. Research shows study techniques and practice with them really help the students be more successful. Model how to assess if a strategy is helpful and if different strategies are better than in different contexts. Most students have no idea how to study and expect a passive strategy to be effective. So here's some of the curves and information that Amber specifically uses in our classroom. Active versus passive, time-saving techniques, how to fit in their schedules. She is very good about using AI to help organize things and having our students do that. And we all know once you learn something, if you just let it go, they're not going to get it. But if you can keep reminding them and using it and showing it, then they'll better understand. And it's not just memorizing it.
I
Right,
changed
Amber?
rooms. Does that help? I changed rooms. I
Oh,
left my
much
office.
better. Much better. Thanks, Amber.
So I just want to highlight a couple things that we've missed here. So self-management is really about how you behave when there's nobody watching. So when you don't have somebody who is telling you what to do, how to do it, and when to do it, how do you find yourself being successful? And so in this previous slide that we had up, I really wanted to let you know that self-management, especially skill 2, is really about managing your materials. And so we need to have them practice the strategies to see what works for them. So one size fits all is never going to work for our students. And so we need to make sure that we are modeling and we are mentoring and that we are giving feedback. So in our things like binder and notebook checks, I actually give them feedback on their notes so that they are understanding where they can build up their skills and do better. I also have that material station because they need to know that it's important for them to have what they need to be successful. If they are coming unprepared, they're not going to be able to learn what they need to do. On this one, we talk about the forgetting curve all the time in my class because a lot of times my students, if they have class on Tuesday and Thursday, they probably are trying to not think about math again until the next time they come. And that is a terrible life decision. And we need to help them understand how our brain works and moving information from short term to the long term memory. So when I am looking at this, it's not just about how you're keeping yourself organized, it's about how you're studying. Studying math is not intuitive for students. Understanding like it's not a passive act. You cannot sit and read and get it. You have to do it. And a lot of our students just simply do not understand. And then when they get to a system like a college, they are just expected to know that they should just sit and get and then magically produce. And that is a thing, especially our students who are coming from an ABE environment into the college, incredibly struggle with is the idea of what studying is. So we need to make sure that we remember that studying is not intuitive and that we need to teach people how to do it. So we need to do this with direct instruction, with mini lessons, and we need to practice because none of these things are just going to happen on their own. And so these are things that we actually spend a lot of time with. Now, I know Ellen was talking about how I use AI, and so I want to talk about that carefully here in the next section. So when we look at time management is huge for our students. Our adults lead really complex lives. School is not the main focus of our students' lives, even though we'd like to maybe think it was. And so, especially with our ABE students who are maybe only coming a little bit, or maybe they're only logging in once in a while, we need to figure out why that is and how we can figure out how to fit learning into those schedules to be meaningful. Skill 3 is about time management, and we need to make sure that if we're trying to just give them a schedule and saying, hey, write down the stuff you have to do onto this calendar, and then poof, now you will know how to manage your life. I have done that for many years. It is not effective. Students don't usually take it seriously, and none of my students have ever come back and said, wow, Amber, filling out that calendar at the beginning of the semester really helped me see all the things I have going on. And so we need to be much more purposeful about honoring all the ways that they're coming to the classroom without changing the expectations for them. We can have the high expectations for students and honest expectations with students around time management and what they can accomplish. We have a number of students who are working multiple jobs, caretaking, trying to come to school, trying to have hobbies, also trying to sleep at some point. And so we need to just put those all together in a way that is effective. Going to be really honest, I have tried 10 million things and nothing has really been this silver bullet that has fixed time management for students. Our students always think that they can cram more in, and life doesn't allow them to take things out. And so we need to really work with that more effectively. So I have actually started using AI as a way to navigate this. And I have found this to be surprisingly successful, even though I'm getting a little pushback from people like, but should I use AI? And so I think that this is a great way to incorporate some of those digital literacy skills. So one of the things that we've been doing is that we want to honor the complexity of the lives that my students have. And so if I say, hey, you should make a schedule. So my class at the college is a 6-credit college class, which means that they should be spending 12 to 18 hours outside of the classroom studying. And when I tell students that, They laugh and they don't believe me. And so trying to figure out, like, how can we look at all the things that we have and what your goals are and what you want to achieve and what's it going to take to get there. So I had created an assignment using ChatGPT to create a study schedule for each individual student. And we talked a lot about how do we use effective prompts to get us what we need. And to do an effective prompt, we need to be honest and realistic with ourselves about the demands that we have on our lives. So you can see here, this is actually one of the screenshots of one of the worksheets that I do with my students. And I do this activity with them a couple times throughout the semester. I've been working on it this semester with my students because our lives are dynamic. They evolve, they change. We now have overtime or soccer started or whatever these things are that are additional demands, or we hit a topic that's harder for us and we need to dedicate more time. And so we need to talk to our students about how we need to reflect on how our time management is going and revise based on the outcomes we're getting, and are the outcomes we're getting what we're hoping to get. And so as we were working on this with students, we came up with some sample prompts and we talked about a lot of how do I get what I want out of AI. Oh, excuse me.
That's you.
So we also talk about in our digital literacy that our better prompts get better outcomes. And so this also was interesting because it was a great tie-in. They actually had an article 2 weeks ago about how people using the word please with ChatGPT and different AI models are actually using so much like memory and bandwidth of the AI systems that it's creating problems. So then we talked about, like, we had a conversation of should we be polite with AI or not and how that impacts it. But if you see, these are some prompts that my students came up with. And I think that they're really telling because you can see where are the things that our students are concerned about? What are the things that our students are wondering about? And so a lot of my students came up with prompts that were about make a schedule for me that I can follow. And I find that that is really important, especially because math is such an interactive experience and it's not a passive study experience. That there is most of my students don't know how to study. They don't know how to work at home. They don't know how to be effective with their time. And a lot of that comes from the mental load that it takes to create a schedule. So if they just know that when it's Monday, I scheduled these appointments, I'm going to do it at this time, and I just have to go in and I'm going to do these questions and I'm going to do this kind of thing, which ChatGPT will tell you, like, you're going to go into my lab and you're going to do 5 online homework questions, and then you're going to work on your written homework, all of those things. They don't have to think about that, and that reduces some of the mental load so that they can do more with the math that we're trying to have them do. Also, ChatGPT can get kind of fun where they can actually show you videos that you can watch. They can give you YouTube videos. They can do things. And then we talk a lot about being careful consumers of AI generated information. And we talk about what happens when they give us some crazy stuff. And so this is a great way for us to practice one of my most important skills that we try to use in the math classroom. I really want my students to have ownership and agency over their learning. And when they need to ask for help and they don't know the right kind of question to ask to get the help that they need, they often don't feel satisfied, whether it's coming in and working one-on-one with me or Ellen, or it's working with a tutor, or it's, working with their friends. If you don't ask the kind of questions that you really need to ask, you don't get an answer that is satisfying and helpful to you. And so, asking good questions and asking critical, like, targeted questions really makes a difference in our students, and it also helps their agency and independence. Our goal in my math class, obviously I want you to learn math, but I want you to have independence to learn the kind of math that you're interested in, that you want to learn, that you need to learn for your job, or you're trying to help your kid out with homework. And practicing these kinds of questions and putting things in and comparing. Did I get an answer that was helpful versus not? Did I think this was going to work? What didn't work about it? How can I evaluate that is really important. So one of the things that I really want my takeaway here is that we have to be explicit with our students about these skills. We cannot assume that they know them. We cannot assume that they're just going to figure them out on their own. And we cannot assume that they are, that if they're not doing it, they don't want to. Most of my students don't know how. They don't know where to start. They don't have the bandwidth to do all of this work. So why not leverage some of these skills that we have? So what I want to do right now is, first, I need to take a quick breath because whoo, it's been exciting. But I want to know if you can put something in the chat of, I'm curious, do you help your, when you say students study, how do you help your students study? Do you have any good ways that you use in your classrooms to create study plans for your students? Ellen, what are things that you do with your students? Because your students are traditional ABE students. What are some of the study strategies that you use?
Well, even having them think about what was important. You know, we have a test coming up. What do you think is the most important thing that is going to be on the test? Or what do you think is the most important thing that you will need to know past this class? And then each of them, it's what's giving you the most problem. If it's giving you the most problem, you should probably spend way more time on that than something that's easy, because that's what they want to do. So it's even knowing what to study. But like you said, they don't even know how to ask the questions to figure it out sometimes.
I appreciate Beth in the chat talking about what happens when they get behind on their work. That is something that we talk about quite a bit in understanding. Our students are often coming, if they're coming from the like a local education system, a lot of them have had opportunities to retake assessments and retake tests, and they think that retakes are these magical things that are going to help their math scores improve. And one of the challenges is that they get so focused on the retake that they're not able to also keep up to date on the things that are currently happening. Like time doesn't stop because you're trying to do a retake. And so one of the things that is really key in this is that any of these skills, these ACES skills, are really important for our mathematicians to be able to feel like they have some control and that they can have a role in their success. I think a lot of times our math students, especially those with math anxiety and math trauma, think that math is something that is happening to them. And we really want to change that. And these are skills that are going to be especially important for our students that are going to have to access some things on their own. And we want to make sure that they feel good about that. And if you, I actually learned about using ChatGPT to create schedules from my personal trainer. He said that if ChatGPT works great to get you started on a personal training journey if you can't afford a personal trainer. And so we talk about how creating a schedule like this is creating it's like a personal training plan for your math success. And my students kind of jive on that. They think it's kind of funny to talk about what would a personal trainer tell you to do to be successful in our math classroom? And what I like about this and what I like about using these kinds of scores or these kinds of tools is that it's very individualized. So what one student is dealing with doesn't have to be compared. It doesn't have to be leveraged. It doesn't have to be put against somebody else's in class. They can all do it independently and still come up with something. So I actually ask my students to go through these prompts and print out their study plan. And then I help them like hold accountable to it. So like, what are some things we could do? Okay, it's telling you to do this technique. Let's practice it. What will it look like? There's also some really cool things where if you can actually ask prompts about like, I'm getting ready for my GED math test. I'm currently at this many points. how can I increase my score, or what are some extra ways I can practice? Like, you can ask it a lot of specific questions that are targeted for just that. And so not all the prompts are good. I think math prompts are almost always hilarious when you get started, but it's important for our students to know that as they are moving on into higher ed, if that is one of their goals, using AI appropriately is a major thing a lot of colleges are talking about right now. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about how we can use it as a tool and what are some of its limitations. So one of the other things that I want you to do right now is we are going to talk about one other thing. So in self-management, skill number 1 is about working to achieve your goals and understanding what are some of those obstacles and barriers to achieve your goals. And for most of our students, anxiety and stress is one of the biggest obstacles that they're going to have to overcome. And so one of the things that I do is I talk a lot about how our brain works. I know that I was having tech issues earlier, but I had that graph of how your information decays over time and how studying brings us back up to that first point, talking about those in a really tangible way. So I also talk about things like math anxiety and math trauma in really real ways, in a way that honors that those experiences are valid, but also giving them, empowering them with tools and strategies to navigate it. So I love this activity. This is called shape breathing. I do it with lots of different things. So earlier in the semester, we had pizza breathing. Sometimes we have pentagon breathing. We do it lots of different ways. One of the things that I want my students to do is I want my students to notice when their body is starting to feel stress or anxiety. I want my students to be able to know what it feels like inside if they are moving from a place of like productive struggle to just struggle. And so we do a lot of body work in our math classes, which I think goes along a lot with these self-management skills in ACES. So what I want you to do is I picked some shapes here, and I actually want you to take a second and do this with me. Pick a shape, any of the shapes that you see, or maybe imagine a pizza if you want to. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of time and do this together. We're going to breathe in for 6 counts while we're tracing the shape. And you aren't going to trace the shape like this super fast, although I do have some students who like to trace the shape really fast. But even in your mind, trace the shape while you're breathing in for 6. You're going to hold your breath in while you trace the shape again. I try to get my students between 4 and 6 seconds. And then we are going to breathe out slowly while tracing the shape one more time. The reason that we're going to do this is that it's going to help regulate our parasympathetic nervous system. It's going to help us get back into our body. I always tell my students to try to see while you're feeling these breaths in your body, can you feel your toes? Can you wiggle your toes? And how are you going to do that? My students are encouraged to draw the shapes. They're encouraged to doodle the shapes, but I am going to ask you to just take a second with me, pick one of your shapes, it doesn't matter. And I want you to take a second and I want you to visualize tracing it or physically trace it. Hold it for the while you trace it again, and breathe out while you trace it a 3rd time. So let's go ahead, pick your shape. Ellen, pick your shape.
I got my shape.
All right, perfect. So I'm going to pick my shape. We're going to breathe in while I trace it. We're going to hold. And we're going to breathe out. Usually I have students do this 2 or 3 times. When we're super stressed, I always pick pizza because pizza seems to make people happy. But there are lots of really good videos, and I didn't want to show any on here, but if you Google shape breathing, there's lots of cool shapes, and you can talk about, there's so many mathy topics in there where you can talk about how the shape is growing, especially if you are working on making some of those transformations or talking about similar size, like similar triangles and things like that. You can watch it grow and you could calculate those. So I just want you to know that it's not just what's your schedule, how are you studying, but it's also how are you connecting inside your body. So our next section here, hopefully we will have no tech adventures. is learning strategies. And learning strategies are planned methods, steps, or actions, techniques, things that we're doing to facilitate our learning. So this might be organizing information. It might be reading and listening with a specific purpose in mind. It might be like addressing things on like, how are you learning? So I know that when I used to teach in a learning lab setting where they had to manage their own learning log, it might be taking notes, but it's also going to be about knowing how and when to use specific strategies. And our goal is to create independent learners. So when we're talking about learning strategies, that's going to be our goal. So in this, I am going to talk about learning strategy skill 2, which is organizing and retaining new information to aid in recall. So one of the things that I am noticing is that not only do students not know how to study, they also are really struggling with how to take notes. And in traditional ABE classrooms, there's might not be a lot of explicit practice on taking notes. And I find that there's two main places we're expecting students to get information from. That might be from a lecture. So when I say lecture, I mean somebody telling them something. And then when there's notes from the textbook, that is a written aid of some sort. It could be a website, it could be a textbook. But there's kind of two categories that our students are expected to be able to get information from. And so I want to make sure that I am talking to my students incredibly explicitly, because taking notes for a math class, I find students are terrible at, because they think they should just write down what the person is writing down. So whether they're writing it down on the board or they're writing it down on the screen, they only want to write down what was written down. And I think that that is robbing them of really important, meaningful connections and true understanding. And so we actually spend a lot of time at the beginning talking about how we take notes and why do we take notes and how do we use notes once we take them. And we also start talking about the research that's coming out, that students who are using a paper and pencil retain information differently and often better than students who are taking notes by typing. And so these are things that we need to talk to students about. And so I took a picture. This on the notes from a lecture on the side here is one of the structures that I've created. And I wanted to use this as an example because it's not pretty. It's not typed out, it's not fancy, but it is a guided notes that these are the notes that I know we're going to talk about in class. It's handwritten, it is a photocopy, but it's there and it gives them a structure. One of the things that I think about is, as teachers, I'm going back to that idea of how can we lessen some of the mental load for students. So if they're trying to listen and write down everything we're saying, they're not actually thinking deeply about anything that we're saying. So I try to give them as much structure as I can. While we're doing that, we're going to have students, we're going to talk about the benefits of using colors. We're going to talk about the benefits of coming back and taking notes. So some of these notes were things that were added later. You're going to notice there's pictures in here that are happening, and why drawing pictures or sketches really helps. And how she, in this student example, rewrote some things in her own words to go with what I said. Because I actually didn't say all these words in class, but I said all these words in class, but I didn't write all these words in there. And so during our time together, I actually will show them a copy of the notes that I would take as a learner and how that looked. And we'll talk about, like if we're trying to answer a question using my notes versus I usually have a bad note example. We compare. I will go through and do notebook checks for students. And so I will say, hey, is there anything that you could say to yourself? My goal with notes is that they are writing down something that is a conversation, that is a living, breathing document. And if you are a person who has to teach all of the standards, you're going to know that this goes really, really well with our CCRS writing skills and our listening skills. And so we need to talk about what does a good note look like, but also not what is a good note, but also why. What is the purpose behind taking a good notes? And how can I use those to help me study? Whether it is, here's a problem and I don't know how to solve it, where can I go back and get information? Most of our students especially our students who are just doing online classes, or like the who are just doing, my open math, or they're just doing Edmentum, they're often not writing anything down. It's just all happening up here in this amorphous blob. And so we need to get our students to write it down and then be able to go back and refer to it. And so oftentimes I will ask my students, go back in your notes and find an example where or go back in your notes and find a time that we needed to use this strategy, and bonus points if it's not from this week, and having them draw those connections that they can move back and forth. And then on the next side, I included an example of something where I asked my students to use the textbook and copy down the steps that they see. And I'm including this example not because it is a beautiful example. You'll notice that like there's scribbling on here and it's kind of a mess. But I think this is also real. Like this is how this student was interacting with this material. And so what I think is really important here is that I try to give them structure, because my students don't know how to use math text, whether it's online or written text, to get information. So by giving them a specific example and a problem and having them write out the steps and figuring out how they're going to use that information has been helpful to get my students to go back into that text and use it as a resource. Now, I wanted to get your attention to the very bottom of the green box where it says notes from textbooks. I have 2 prompts that I've added to our notes there. And these are notes that they'll hand in to me and I'll look at and I engage with. So I want to always let them know that what they're writing down and doing has value, but it's also kind of a fun formative assessment piece for me. But I added these questions because I wanted to know more about how they were engaging with material. And so having a question about like, what's one thing you noticed? Obviously, if you've been to any of our A-Team webinars, we love Notice and Wonder. And I noticed that I realized that I very rarely encourage that notice and wonder about notes that they were taking. And this question number 5 is always the same on all of my textbook reading guides, the supported reading guides. And I learned so much about what they're bringing to the experience, what connections are they making, and how that matters. The next question is, what questions do you have? Now, notice this student wrote none. Cool. But what I noticed is that if I ask this every single time I ask them to read something from a textbook, when they do have a question, they'll ask it. So they might say none 10 times. But on the 11th time when they have a question, they'll write it down, or they'll be like, okay, I noticed that they did this, they skipped a step here. How did they get from here to here? And that provides an opportunity for us to have a lot of really rich conversations. So when we're talking about guided notes, it's how can we give students a good model and a good structure so that when they go to their next class and they're just expected to kind of figure it out, they at least have seen some good examples of what these look like. I know in ABE classrooms, we don't often do this, and or at least in my classrooms, I didn't do this enough. And if I could go back into a traditional ABE classroom, this is something I would implement a lot more. And I think it's an important way that we are talking about good strategies of learning in all of the content areas. Speaking of which, I wanted to show, yes, I love graphic organizers for notes. So there's a thing in the chat about using graphic organizers. So one of the things that I do at the beginning of the semester is that I will model lots of different, like not too many because I don't want to overwhelm students, but we'll talk about different graphic organizers, how they're used, and we'll practice them. And I usually, like as an assignment, will force them to use a graphic organizer a couple of times so that they can see what it looks like, because just doing it once doesn't give you the feel for it. And then I give them choice. So I have some students who use Cornell notes and they will die by Cornell notes. We've got some students who like to take notes online using a tablet. We've got people who write them down. You saw a picture that I always provide tools. So we talk about, sometimes we annotate with Post-it notes. We use highlighters, we use different colored pens, and I provide them in my room. Because if you want to try something that's going to help you learn, I want you to have access to those things to try it out. And I'd always rather you try those strategies out with me and see if they work or not, than trying them out in a more high stakes situation. Because if you're trying something, I'm going to help you and we're going to sit down and be like, hey, did that quiz go the way you wanted it to go? oh, cool. So maybe we should try a different strategy, but it's always housed in what was something that you really found helpful in that, and how can we bring that to the next thing that we try? And then what did you not like about that? So I really encourage you to have a number of different tools at your disposal that you can work with students on. Um, this is a picture from some notes. I'm working really hard on embedding high-level reading instruction into my math class, which might sound weird, but we know our students, if they need support in math, they probably also need support in reading, and especially when it comes to academic reading. So this is actually an example of a article that my student was looking at, and they oftentimes are expected to get information from written text, but maybe have never had the experience doing that. So we've been working hard at finding information from written text and figuring out what it means and how do I use it and what kind of questions can I answer. I mean, there's just like so much involved in it. So these are some examples that my students, I asked her if I could take a picture of it, because you're gonna notice some things when we talk about word problems or we talk about getting information from text. These are the strategies we really want them to be using. So you'll notice she's interacting with the text. She's highlighting things in different colors. She's writing definitions of words. She's asking herself questions. I was super excited to see in this first picture over here where it says what's considered high income. So we're practicing those critical thinking skills. We're practicing some like data analysis in this task. But we want our students to know that this, just like in anything else, that they need to interact with it. And once we start interacting with text this way, their notes usually get better as well, because they see that this is for them to think critically, and it goes really well. So these are an article that we were reading for some statistics practice, actually. So you can kind of see there's some statistics things written in there, and how do we pick that out? How do we use it? What do these numbers mean? So I do want you to know that this, you have to model, you have to practice, and you have to make it a part of your everyday. Math class should not just be doing math problems. It is a very big experience that they should be engaged in. Ellen, so I talked about how we looked at it a piece of reading. These are some steps that you like to use when you're doing word problems.
Yes. And this is the first semester I have also tested their reading skills and not just their math skills, because it's very discouraging when you get a ways into the semester and realize the reading's getting in the way of the math. And so we expect them to know words. I mean, I know them. They're not hard problems, but not everybody's at the same place. And I sometimes forget that. So just going over what words mean. Highlight the words you don't know, and let's talk about it. My students like to just, oh, there's numbers. I'm going to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Whatever we're doing now, I'm just going to do it. So I like having the steps, having them take the time. We start off very basic at the beginning because it's a lower level reading and easier problems. As we get higher into the class, the reading level goes up also. So we might need to underline a few things or look into things, but we're still taking the notes. We're still doing the things. We're doing it together. We're practicing. I also like, here's the problem. I'm showing them, what should we write down? How should we do this? What should I be doing with this? And asking the questions. The other organization that amazes me is when they do a test, where they do their work, where do they circle the problems. There's tests I get back that I'm like, how can you even find where the answer is? So even trying to organize those little steps that we expect everybody to know by the time they hit college, will make them more successful in other classes in the higher level math. We do the things. It's all about steps and thinking and being able to take what you know. We all have that toolbox in our head. How do we find what we need and then do it? But then also double checking, are you answering what they're asking for?
And so when we talk about these connections between these ACES skills and these mathematician skills that we're building, none of these are probably, like, I totally recognize none of these are like, oh my gosh, I've never heard about any of these ideas before. But the idea is that we can be incredibly intentional. We don't have a lot of time with our students. And so we can double dip in a way that's important. But one of the things that I want to say, and I know that I keep saying it kind of broken recordy, is that we need to be incredibly intentional and we need to be transparent about what we're doing and why we're doing it. We can't assume that there's going to be this like automatic transferability for our students. So just because we talk about how to do it in this one setting doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to just like magically bring it with them to their next adventure. So one of the things that I want to make sure I highlight is that when we talk about these learning strategies and these things that we've been talking about that have helped us study, manage our time, how do we take notes, how do we understand how to ask good questions, we can't just house it in this little bitty setting, because a lot of times it's hard to see how this goes to somewhere else. So one of the things that I've been working intentionally to do is to talk about how we could take these skills that we've been working on. So how can we take our time management? How can we take our note taking? How can we take how we've read for information and synthesized it to be able to answer some questions? What would I do to tell an employer this? A lot of my students are like they think they're going to own their own businesses and be millionaires. And I hope that they are, and that they come and remember me someday and take care of me. But we want to help them see how they can communicate that this thing we've been practicing in math class means something somewhere else. And so one of my favorite things to do at the end of every semester is to take these ACES skills, to take some of these things that we've been doing and say, how could I word this for a resume? If I was in a job interview and somebody asked me how I did something, how could I leverage these skills that we've been doing to communicate it? And I think my students really appreciate that the things that we're doing isn't something I want them to just do here. It's something I want them to be able to take with them to their next step. But if we're not really explicit about how that might look, or how to help them kind of like make those connections, oftentimes it doesn't happen. And that's something I've learned through a lot of failure. I just assumed that because my students have been practicing asking questions, they're going to just know how to ask questions in their next step. And that has been a mistake on my part. And it was something that it was done well intentioned, but I want to make sure that it's clear. So when you are building up your schedule and you're thinking about how you're going to manage your time, what are some things that you need to consider when you're planning your next class? If you're taking on your second full-time job, or now that you're having your next kid, or you want to switch to night classes, is that going to help you get to your goal? Being really transparent about like this we're practicing it in math, but you're gonna need these everywhere else, and how does that look? And so it's been really cool to see how my students are figuring out how they could leverage it. My favorite is to talk about how are we going to how did you use steps to solve a problem? Or like they always ask a question in an interview about like how you've worked with a team. So many of our ACES skills are like how we managed our time, our resources, and expertise to get a job done. And so I think that that's really an important thing that is sometimes missed. So I don't want to make it seem like just because you did it in the math class, you've checked this box. You want to make sure you're pulling those connections forward as well. So for our we're getting close to wrapping some ideas up, but I want to do one more activity because I like math. And so we started with some critical thinking skills. We're going to end with a critical thinking skill. So one of the things that we like to often do as an icebreaker is 2 truths and a lie, but there are some really rad math examples. This comes from mathbeforebed.com, and they have a ton of 2 truths and a lie. My students love to come up with 2 truths and a lie about math concepts. So I wanted to show you an example of some critical thinking that you could do. So in front of you, you should see some circles, and you should see some orange pieces and some white pieces, and you should see some ideas. So I want you to take a second, and I want you to think to yourself, which of these statements are true and which is a lie? So when I'm looking at this, I am going to be thinking A, 3 circles are less than half full. B, 2 circles are more than half full. Or C, there are 2.5 full orange circles. So take a second and think to yourself, which 2 are true and which is the lie? So let's take a second and think. All right, can you be brave and put something in the chat? Which statements do you think are a lie? And if you feel extra brave, tell me why you think it's a lie. Lindsay is making a claim that B is a lie. Can anybody support her claim? Do you agree with Lindsay? Or if you don't agree with Lindsay, do you have a counterclaim? Let's go back. Lindsay is correct. My friend said that they feel like Lindsay is correct. I like that we're supporting my friend Lindsay. So Lindsay and Rob are making a claim that B is a lie. Can somebody tell me why? Polly is saying only 1 circle is more than half full. Beautiful. So this is an example of a task where students are asked to use information to draw conclusions and make decisions. Now, if you are working on fractions, if you are working on parts and wholes, if you're working on, I mean, there's just so many different learning targets we could use for this. I have done this with students, and it's really interesting because I've had students put together orange pieces and make claims. I've had students that have looked at white pieces. I've looked at, like, there's lots of different things my students have brought to this task. I really like tasks like these as transition pieces, whether it's a starter or it's an end of the session. But this is a great way for our students to have to make a claim and support their claim, and then be critical of the claims of others. And then we get into a lot of very exciting conversations when we do this. Obviously, we're in chat right now. It's the end of the day. And we're probably not as caffeinated and as excited as we were at the beginning of our day. But when we are working with this with students, one of the things that I think is really cool is that we get an opportunity to talk about dialogue, discussion, and debate. And my students will start trying to find creative ways to navigate this. So when you're talking about things like critical thinking, these are really cool because we really use some of that vocabulary. Like, do you have a claim? Do you have a counterclaim? Do we have somebody who would second her claim? And do some fun things like that. So for our last few minutes before we are done, I know that I have shared with you a lot. I know Ellen has shared with you a lot. And our setting is really specific to students who are in college supported classes. So I want you to work with a small breakout group for just a few minutes to talk about ways that you can be more intentional in how you are using ACES skills in your math time. So Patsy, do you have breakout rooms ready to go?
I sure do. Anything you want me to put in the chat for them? Maybe a prompt, just in case?
Yep. So what is one way you can be more intentional about supporting ACES skills in your math time? And I will see if I can make sure that this gets shared while you're in your breakout rooms.
All right, I'll open those rooms.
Did I click something?
I think you did. Do you want to join room 1? Oh no, do room 2 for you. All right, go ahead.
Well, thank you to everybody who shared. I am so excited that there's so many different settings and different kind of groups of people that are working on these, and it's so great. I really want to encourage you to keep these conversations going. There are so many other things that Ellen and I were noodling about that we could have included in a session. There's so many things that we would build up together and we could talk about. So this could be like a huge series of how best practices in a math classroom are actually centered around some ideas around ACEs. And I think that it's hopefully something you're going to hear more about as you're going along in your journey. Before we open it up for questions, I do want to make sure that you know that your learning should continue. Lindsay, do you want to tell us about our opportunities with Math Institute?
Yes, so Math Institute is not going to happen until November 7th. However, the registration is open. So please register because then you will get notified when it comes closer to the day. But we have been able to secure Pamela Weber Harris from Math is Figure Outable as the keynote speaker, and she'll do a workshop as well. It will be virtual, so hopefully that makes it easy for folks to attend. But her whole philosophy behind teaching math is really in the name of her company. Math is Figure Outable, and so going on that journey of algorithms to let's make sense of the math, because that is something that we will retain, that understanding when we achieve that. So strongly encourage you to register, and then please know that you can keep track of all upcoming PD on the front page of our Atlas website. At the top in the banner, there is a Google Doc that we keep updated regularly.
And since we're
And I
getting into
just-
kind of a summer quiet season, there is a YouTube channel with tons of recorded webinars that you can go and hear more about ACES. If you want to dig into more ACES stuff, we have lots of math content. There are some great reading things on there if some of these note-taking things were interesting to you. And Patsy, I did not mean to cut you off.
No, I was just going to mention, I dropped that in the chat. If you're not on our website at the moment or aren't quite sure how to get there, you can connect to it directly.
And also, we don't really have a lot of major PD happening until Summer Institute again, but you want to make sure that you keep learning. Ellen and I are year-round teachers. They can't confine us to a traditional school year. So if you are interested in any of the resources that we talked about, or you are interested in some of the, so all of the work that we showed you was student work from this semester. So if you're interested in learning more about some of the strategies that we've tried, the things that have blown up in our faces and have not worked at all. We are very open and honest about the journey that we're on, and how we are continuing to learn, because this is definitely something that is evolving and growing as we are digging into this ourselves. But our contact information is on the screen. We do really encourage you to reach out. And if you try anything that we shared today and you make it better, or you make it more interesting, or you find better connections, please share it with us, because that's how we should learn. We're a big community. So we have yes, Ellen.
One last thing I wanted to add, that game, it's in English, is called Go. Apparently started in China way back in the day. It was appropriated by Japanese, and then after World War I and II, it became more popular. So if you're interested, there's a lot of history in there, I've learned.
Thanks, Ellen. So we just have another minute here. If you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat. Otherwise, and we'll watch those. I do want to say thank you for being understanding of all of the tech issues. Apparently all the tech gremlins wanted to visit me today, and I appreciate your patience and support and hype. That is always makes it better when it feels like everything's falling apart. So if you have any questions,
Everything is fine. Thanks for being so flexible and switching
Thank you,
rooms on us,
everyone.
and wherever you landed, it worked just fine. Thanks, Amber. I'm going to close the recording, but please hang on if you have another question.